I'll be leaving crypto in 2025, and you should too. Here's the hard truth. 99% of people will lose money in crypto after 2025. Not because they didn't buy at the right time, but because they didn't know when to sell. If you're still holding crypto after 2025, you're risking everything you've worked for. Let me be clear, this isn't my opinion. It's backed by over a decade of proven data. Bitcoin follows a predictable 4-year cycle, and every single bull market, Bitcoin peaks 18 months after its halving. That puts the next peak in October of this year. But here's the thing. After the peak, the market doesn't just dip. It crashes by as much as 80 to 90%. We saw it in 2013, 2017, 2021, and I believe it will happen once again in 2025. The cycle isn't up for debate. It's literally written into its code. This isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. So in today's video, I'm gonna break down my exit strategy for 2025. We'll go over the undeniable proof behind Bitcoin's 4-year cycle and why the 2025 peak is locked in, the exact timeline for Bitcoin and altcoin peaks, and my exact exit strategy to protect your profits, avoid the hype, and walk away on top while others lose everything. What if I told you that Bitcoin's price isn't random, but follows a cycle so predictable, it's literally hard-coded into its DNA? Here's a catch. If you don't understand how this cycle works, you could end up losing all your profits, or even worse, get caught holding the bag for another 4 years until the cycle resets again. And this isn't just theory, it's history. Every 4 years, the Bitcoin halving creates a ripple effect that shapes the entire crypto market. If you know how to position yourself during the different phases of the cycle, you can maximize your gains. But if you ignore it, you'll likely either sell too early or get stuck holding the bag. So let me show you guys how this 4-year cycle works, why it's so important, and how it's played out in the last 2 market cycles. The Bitcoin halving cycle is broken down into 5 phases. Phase 1 is a pre-halving accumulation. This is when investors start accumulating Bitcoin before the halving event. Prices tend to just kind of consolidate and remain relatively stable, but at this point, the smart money is already preparing for phase 2, which is the pre-halving rally. As the halving approaches, excitement builds and Bitcoin's price begins to climb, which takes us to phase 3, the pre-halving pullback. Just when it feels like the rally will go on forever, we usually see a pullback, kind of a buy the rumors, sell the news type event. This takes us to phase 4, which is the post-halving accumulation. After the halving, which is this blue line right here, Bitcoin's price often consolidates for several months as a reduced supply starts to take effect. Basically the calm before the storm. Historically, it takes at least 6 months before Bitcoin's price starts to react to the halving, which then leads us to phase 5, the post-halving rally. This is where Bitcoin historically makes its biggest moves. This phase typically peaks about 18 months after the halving. So let's take a look at how these phases have played out throughout the last 2 cycles. You can see after that bear market in 2014-2015, it bottomed out and eventually led us to phase 1, which is the pre-halving accumulation. After about 6 months of accumulation for Bitcoin's price, it finally went into phase 2, the pre-halving rally. During this time, Bitcoin's price moved up over 80% in 4 weeks, which then led us to phase 3, the pre-halving correction. During this time, Bitcoin dropped almost 30% in a week. This then led us to phase 4, the post-halving accumulation, which pretty much lasted around 147 days. Then we finally saw Bitcoin's price break above the previous high during the pre-halving rally, which moved us into phase 5, the post-halving rally. To get to phase 5 pretty much took about 6 months. Because we peaked in June, the post-halving rally lasted 378 days. During that time, Bitcoin's price went up over 2,500%. This marked the peak for Bitcoin in 2017, which led us into the bear market, which bottomed out about 364 days later. During the 2020 halving cycle, the same patterns repeated. After Bitcoin bottomed out, we saw the pre-halving accumulation take place about 300 days before the halving. Now, something unique that happened in 2020 was the COVID crash, where Bitcoin's price dropped 63% in a matter of 4 weeks. Now, this is an outlier event, but it shows us that even with this outlier event, Bitcoin bounced right back into its pattern, going up over 159% 2 months before the halving event, which was of course phase 2, the pre-halving rally. So far, although we had this COVID crash, which was an outlier event, everything is pretty much the same. Now, because of the COVID crash, it did throw off the timings a little bit, and phase 3, which is usually the pre-halving correction phase, typically lasting about 2 weeks or so, only really lasted about 1 week. Then the Bitcoin halving event occurred, and we went on to phase 4, which is the post-halving accumulation phase. We pretty much just accumulated for a few months here. And eventually, about 147 days days later, pretty much exactly what it took during the 2016 halving cycle, we began phase 5, the post-halving rally. This phase lasted about 399 days, which then we eventually peaked and went into the bear market, which once again, just like last time, lasted about 364 days with a drop of 77%. So by now, you should be starting to understand exactly how powerful this 4-year cycle is. It's not just theory, it's a pattern that's played out over and over before. And though a lot of things have happened in the last year, we're watching the same exact cycle unfold right now. During my first cycle in 2016, I had zero clue about these 4-year cycles. I initially got in around $800. I watched my small investment grow by over 2,400% over the next year, all the way up to $20,000. The issue was, I didn't know when to sell. And I literally had to bag hold throughout the entire bear market. So basically over a year, and watched my portfolio drop over 84% during that time. And I'm telling you, it really sucked. But I learned a very valuable lesson, which helped me throughout the 2020 Bitcoin halving cycle. So because of the bear market and because I didn't know when to sell, instead of being up over 2,400%, at the bottom of the bear market, I was only up about 300% at that point. So at this point, I just held and studied to be prepared for the next bull run. And you can see that it eventually paid off. My investment now, instead of just being 2,400% or 280% if I would have sold during the bear market, went well over 8,000%. Now, of course, I didn't sell at the exact peak. It's impossible to know unless you can tell the future. But what I was able to do using historical data and trends is realize how the 4-year halving worked and sell 18 months post halving. I ended up selling right around $65,000 that year, which put my return right around 7,800%. Using the same historical data, the same opportunity is now in front of us for 2025 if you know how to spot it. So if Bitcoin follows its previous cycles, this year should be a very bullish one where we end up peaking. By comparing the current cycle with the last 2 previous cycles, we can find valuable clues about what's coming next. So let's break down where in the cycle we are right now by comparing it to 2016 and 2020. So far this cycle, Bitcoin has followed pretty much the exact same pattern from the last 2 cycles. We had the pre-halving accumulation about 392 days before the halving. We had a massive pre-halving rally about 70 days before the halving. We had the pre-halving pullback about a month before the halving. And we had the post-halving accumulation, once again, as you guessed it, about 147 days post-halving, which brings us to where we currently stand right now during this cycle, which is the post-halving rally. Bitcoin has already gone up about 100% since we began phase 5. Remember that phase 5 is the most explosive part of the cycle, and historically it peaks about 18 months post the halving. For this cycle, that would be in October of 2025. If we compare this phase to 2016 and 2020, they're pretty much the same exact thing. And of course, we're gonna wonder, what if this time is different? But what if it's not? From what we've seen so far, what here tells you that this time is gonna be any different? It has literally followed the same exact pattern and 4-year cycle to the T. So sure, what if this time is different? But right now, everything is telling us that it's gonna be the same. So this gives us a clear framework. This is a time to not be selling, but to just ride the wave, but also start to plan your exit strategy for 2025. So now that we've pinpointed exactly where we are in this cycle, it's time to talk about what happens next. What's the point of riding Bitcoin's bull run if you don't know when to get off? So I'm gonna break down my strategy on how I plan to exit crypto in 2025, which altcoins I'm going to be investing in for maximum returns, and most importantly, when to exit the market entirely. So the first step is knowing when to sell Bitcoin, and we've kind of touched on it already. Historically, Bitcoin's all-time highs come about 18 months after the halving. For this cycle, that puts us in October 2025. My strategy throughout 2025 is anytime Bitcoin hits new all-time highs, I'll be looking to rotate profits into altcoins. This year, I want my altcoin positions to be greater than my Bitcoin position. The reason why is because altcoins have historically outperformed Bitcoin during phase 5. You can see during the last cycle, the total market cap for altcoins went up over 500%, while Bitcoin's price only went up over 100%. This is a massive difference. Another thing is that altcoins peak historically a month later than Bitcoin. So I'll be expecting something similar to this year. And again, the returns are probably gonna be 5 to 10x greater than if you're just in Bitcoin. Anytime Bitcoin's hitting new all-time highs, I'll be rotating that money into altcoins. The closer and closer we get to the peak here in October, I'll be more aggressively selling any all-time highs in Bitcoin into altcoins. Once we're in October, then I'll be looking to most likely just completely get out of Bitcoin and into altcoins. And then October to November, December will be the final step of my exit strategy, which is to completely get out of the market and sell during any all-time highs for altcoins. The key here is to not get greedy. If you still have any positions in crypto, when you see that the market starts to lose momentum, that's probably your final signal to get out. At this stage, the downside risk is going to be far greater than any potential upside. If you want my complete exit plan for 2025, I'll put a link in the description for my guide where I break down everything that we've spoken about today. It'll be in the description below. So now that you have a clear plan for when to exit the market in 2025, there's one more critical piece of the puzzle that you need to complete your strategy, and that's knowing which altcoins to rotate into. To try to figure this out, I created a Bitcoin driven model that predicts altcoin prices for 2025 based on historical trends and data. I built these using 3 different scenarios for Bitcoin's price peak, and this model gave me a prediction on which coins it thinks will have the biggest returns during this altcoin season.